Stealing votes.
Right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Lager Brewing. Thanks for joining us the second day of the summit. We have Ashleigh here. She's going to go over the finer points of Lager Brewing with you all. I did try to do my own slow pour pills this morning, but I drank it while I was waiting for us to get going.
I'm on my way right now, so
Perfect. There we go. Perfect. Well, just a reminder to everyone, if you're having any tech issues, refreshing the screen seems to help quite a bit. There's also tech help at the bottom there if you need it. You can always reduce the resolution using the little gear at the bottom of your screen. And we're going to send it over to Ashleigh to get started.
Cool. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I know it was kind of a last minute thing, but I'm really happy to be here. It's a good, nice Sunday here in Denver, Colorado. So I think I'll drink some beer, talk about making beer, which I did yesterday. So here we go. So my name's Ashleigh Carter. I'm the head brewer and co-owner of Bierstadt Lagerhaus, located in Denver, Colorado. We've been open since about 2016. A little bit about us. We have a 38 hecto, 2-vessel copper system that we got from Germany. We actually brought it directly over from a town called Almendorf, which is a little bit southwest of Nuremberg. There we go. It's decoction capable. I don't really count our 2020 numbers because we were way more off-site production, but when all is running the way it's supposed to, we are primarily in on-site consumption. A little bit of kegs outside. We have 213 hectoliter, about 100 barrel fermenters, one 50 barrel fermenter, and 5 85 barrel lager tanks and an 85 barrel bright tank. I do filter everything. And honestly, one of the most unique things about us is that we only make lager. We don't make anything else, which is the way I like it. So we make 3 beers year round. Slow pour pills, which is what I'm drinking right now. Helles, I should probably drink it then. And Dunkel. So basically what I'm going to talk about a little bit is I'm going to primarily focus on German style because that is what I do most of. But I think a lot of these things can be applicable to different kinds of lager, Czech or Italian, or even, kind of these, I won't call them made up lagers, but, things that don't quite fit true into style, but still kind of fall into the lager category because of yeast, etc. I've been at Bierstadt since the very beginning. I've been a professional brewer now this will be my 10-year anniversary. I think it's actually this month is 10 years of professional brewer. And pretty much my entire career, I've made nothing but lager. So I know a lot about a very small piece of the pie. One of the things that strikes me about lager, and when you start comparing, lager versus ale, one of the biggest things is how similar they are if you look at, just basic specs, right? So we look at these two things, right? Helles and a golden blonde ale, right? If you look down the line there, you can see how basically all their gravities are about the same. IBUs are really close, right? SRM is kind of in the game. Like if it weren't for, some key differences, they would kind of be the same thing. Same with if you look at Dunkel lager and brown ale. So Dunkel just means dark, Helles just means light. You can see the stats there, and they're very, very similar to each other. They have a lot of overlap. Their Venn diagrams overlap quite a bit. So what is the thing that makes a Dunkel, excuse me, a Dunkel, and a Helles instead of just a golden or blonde ale and a brown ale, right? To me, it's these 4 differences. They can kind of overlap each other, but I think they're kind of uniquely their own as well. So, the biggest thing to me is when I think about lager beer, I think lager is the absence of yeast character. Like that is how I explain it most basically to people, is that you should really see hops and malt shine, and yeast should kind of just be nothing that you even kind of know about. I mean, there are some nuances between the different kinds of lager yeast, but for the most part, really, that shouldn't be a key player in, how the beer tastes. So we talk about yeast flavor and characteristics. So, it's not a yeast forward beer like, the main ones that we think of are Hefeweizen and Saison, etc., wit beer. But also if you think about just something as simple as an IPA, and it's not really simple, those yeast characters really are a part of the beer. And that's why people do choose different kinds of yeast, different ale yeasts, because they have different, actually ester profiles. That's a big part of it. So the yeast flavor characteristics, and in that is the ester profile. So again, I think lager is the absence of yeast character. So when we're talking about the absence of yeast character, you really want to subdue those esters. You don't want any of those fruit characters at all. Another thing is the sweetness and crispness. So if I think about a blonde ale and a Helles, one of the biggest differences is how dry they are and how sweet they are, if you want to look at it that way. So that kind of crispness, when we call them crispy boys or whatever, that is kind of what we're thinking of. And then drinkability. And I think that kind of that encompasses all the things, is that, with lacking that sweetness, with the lack of yeast character, with the lack of ester, it all kind of comes full into this drinkability corner. And I think if you take, if you drank 3 blonde ales and 3 Helles, I think you would notice that you probably prefer to drink the Helles because of these 3 other things. So here's just like kind of a list of lager styles. A lot of people, which is probably one of my biggest pet peeves, think about that there's pills and there's lager, right? Pills is just part of lager. I think we all know that by now. And if you look at this list, it's fairly diverse, honestly, even though you're kind of only playing with a couple of variables, right? And what do these all have in common? And to me, one of the things I'm going to focus on in this talk is, I think what they all have in common is how you develop these recipes and how they're made. And I think that, all of these beers can be made with, individually, can be made with no more than 2 hops and no more than 1 malt. Or excuse me, no more than 2 malts and no more than 1 hop. Now, if you look at like maybe Italian pills, maybe that's not the case, but I think it's the simplicity. In my own brewery, for example, we only make Pils Dunkel Helles, but I basically consider myself a 3 malt, 2 hop, 1 yeast brewery. And I pretty much make, yeah.
Do you want to put your slides up? I think they came down.
They did. I am looking at them right now. So
yeah, we don't have them on our screen though.
Well, that's silly. Hey, Crowdcast, what are you doing to me? Oh, it kicked me out of what? There you are. Share screen. Window. Huh. Share. That's odd. Is it sharing it now?
Yep, there we go. We're good.
Well, that's very odd. I guess we'll go back. See if we can figure this out. Sorry about that. I don't know why it did it. Okay. So what do they all have in common? And that to me is, like I said, we're a 3 malt, 2 hop, 1 yeast brewery. And I think you can make all these beers using that. And I think what really separates lager from a lot of the other styles is they're so technique driven, right? It's not necessarily recipe driven. So to me, malt selection, right? We're going to start at the beginning. Keep it simple. Again, technique driven. I think mashing and decoction, they change wildly the flavor of the beer. Really reducing the amount of caramel and crystal malts in there. I think these should be fairly non-complex recipes, right? Not adding a bunch of different malts does not make something more complex. And I think that's a lot of what people fall into sometimes, is trying to complex things just for the sake of complexity and not really looking at, what does it actually add to the beer? And I don't think you add a lot to the beer, especially lager beer, by muddling it up with a bunch of different things. Also, this is something that I fully believe in, is no carafoam, no carapils. A lot of people believe that those are foam positive, but they're actually foam negative malts. Charlie Bamforth had a study where actually using these different malts, they were actually foam negative. They didn't actually help with head retention. And they're also not really fermentable. So if we're looking back at that slide before, and we're looking at drinkability and sweetness and crispness, we really want to drive up our fermentability and drive our attenuation up. So no carafoam, no carapils. Keep the crystal malt out if you can, and try to focus on 1 or 2 things. Hops, the other big ingredient, right? We only have really 4 ingredients to work with. This is actually a picture from Volznak, which I went to for their hop harvest, where we got some of our hops from. A really incredible experience. We use 2 hops, Hallertau Tradition and Hallertau Mittelfrüh. If I'm doing a collab or something, obviously I'll get something interesting or different, but I really think that you can do everything you need to with these 2 hops. So speaking of hops, noble varieties. And I'm talking, again, we're just talking, if I'm going to go straight traditional style beer. If you're going to try to make, maybe, Italian pills or something else, I think that, break some of these rules, but if we're going to talk about, the basics, walking before you can run, I think hops are super important. A lot of people get into this mindset that they need to add, high alpha hops to something because they want to save a little bit of money or whatever. But I think when you're especially making these kind of beers, you're not making IPA at, 5 pounds a barrel. You're looking at, even in a pills, 1 pound per barrel. Like, you're not really saving that much money by going with something like a Magnum instead of just going with, a Hallertau Middle Fruit, which is usually about 3.8 to 4.1 or so. So this low alpha hops is really, like, to describe it, it is softness of bitterness. I know it says it right there and it doesn't sound like much. And while the Germans are very technical, they all kind of have this soft, squishy kind of language when it comes to beer. One of my favorite books, one of the books that I kind of go to when I'm looking at how to make something or something old or refining my techniques is Textbook of Brewing by Jean de Clercq. And in that book, they talk about 2 beers made with the same IBUs, one with high alpha hops and one with low alpha hops. And when you make those 2 beers, people prefer the one with low alpha hops. And that's because, alpha is not just alpha, right? It's not just bitterness. There's so many other things in there. There's oils, there's beta acids, there's all sorts of things. There's hop material itself that contribute to flavor. So I am a firm believer in never using high alpha hops, even for bittering or anything. I do think it lends to the softness and the kind of drinkability of lager beer. Again, if we're talking very traditional, low and late additions or dry hopping, and generally 1 to 3 additions, but most all the beers that we make have 1 to 2, with very little exception to that. So recipe formulation. So we've talked about hops and malt, which are the 2 main ingredients, obviously besides yeast, which we'll get to. But again, I just want to speak to how simply you can make these beers and how you don't have to overthink them necessarily. So as you can tell, Dunkel, Doppelbock, Rauschbock, these are all very similar, right? They share a lot of the same malts, but they taste wildly different. And that's due to their starting gravities, where you place the hops and how much of the hops. And to me, if you have the ability to do decoction, that also is a super flavor carrier. So, these are our recipes that we use at my place. So you can see them right there. They're very simple. People a lot of times ask me about Rauschbock and about that 74% number. I am a firm believer that in order to make a true smoked beer, and people say they like low smoke, like don't overdo it on the smoke. But I think that when you make smoked beer, if you don't go heavy on the smoke comes off as an afterthought, as an off flavor instead of an actual flavor of the beer. And the thing about smoke is it has kind of this wearing on you tendency. If you've ever been to Schrankela or Spezial in Bamberg, once you drink 2 or 3 of them, that's what they say, then the smoke kind of goes away and you can taste the rest of the beer underneath it. So it has kind of a fatiguing on the palate and kind of goes away. Your brain doesn't really register it anymore. So I always go super high on my smoked beer. And again, you can see IBUs in dark beers, especially in dark lager beers. They're not necessarily, they're just kind of there to balance the sweetness, right? So you're probably, when you look at these recipes back here, you're probably saying like, how is the beer dark enough? And this is a technique that I learned actually from a Czech guy who actually made a beer called Fleku, which is a Czech dark lager, really famous Czech dark lager in Prague. And basically, in order to get that color you're looking for, you're using a dark malt. So we use Carafa 3 Special, which is an dehusked malt that's already ground. And I literally just take it and dump it over my mash after we're getting ready to run off. And all that does is stain the mash. You don't end up actually mashing it. And so you're not really extracting any of those acrid or roasty character from it. Which is pretty cool. And you're getting the color that you want. You're not going to gain any sugars or anything from this malt, so I don't think there's really a point in mashing it to begin with. And it's a super easy technique to just, sprinkle it over the top. And these are kind of the numbers that I use when I'm making a Vienna, just to darken it up a little bit. Schwarzbier, obviously a little bit more. And then in my Dunkel Doppelbock, just kind of depending where you want it on the spectrum, it gives it a really wonderful ruby character, garnet color, which I absolutely love when it comes to like those kind of beers. So light lager, honestly, a little bit even easier. These are our recipes again that we make at our place at Bierstadt, and they are super simple. Honestly, you a lot of people get caught up in like, again, in recipe. And I think that, when you're simple about it, you can really let the technique shine. I think it's actually funny. I put Vienna in our Helles to change the color slightly darker, but I like never notice it. I should probably just take it out. But us brewers, we are kind of full of dogma too. So I don't want to change anything that's working. I will say that, we kind of sit on our platitudes a little bit. I think, hops in these pale beers are much more important. And especially in a pils, right? That's like your snappiest, your kind of finest hop aroma. And pils kind of gets this reputation, if you read a style guideline, that it's supposed to be, hoppy. It's not. The hops should be a boiled hop character, which I think if you've tasted, dry hop beers, which everybody has, you can tell the difference between a boiled hop character and a non-boiled dry hop character, or non-boiled hop character, which is, a late addition or whatever. And in pils, it should really be a snappy, dry, barely in the glass. It's kind of like located in the foam. Kind of, I call it a dusty hop character. So that's how I think about pils, which is, one of the beers that we make that's my favorite beer probably on the planet, actually. Although Helles makes a good case for itself usually. So we really use first wort hopping in 70 minutes. And through doing enough trial and error and through enough years, I find that first wort hop actually really hangs on to the aroma quite a bit. So I recommend, playing with where you're putting your hops in, and not automatically assuming that just putting in hops late is how you're going to get your hop aroma. And again, talking about low alpha hops, all of these things kind of come together, and you should make the beer that you want to drink, obviously, and play around with these things, and don't get stuck in kind of your traditional way of doing things, how you formulate recipes. Helles, hops are just there as a backbone to sweetness. It should be a malt showcase. So you really want to showcase whatever that pils malt is. We use Barca pils, which I absolutely love, but floor malted Bohemian pils. We are all Wireman, but there's some Erex. There's some interesting American ones that are coming on the market. And so I really think when you're making a Helles, to like use some restraint with hops and let the malt really, really shine, and have the hops just there to make sure you can drink enough of it, All right, let's see, next. There we go. Grist. So I think this is kind of a topic that we don't really touch on that often, is liquor to grist ratio. We're always talking about, obviously, hops and malt. There's some of these things, though, when you're talking about beers in your brewery that make a difference that you don't really realize. You kind of get set into your ways. And if you're making these kind of styles, lager styles, it should be a very thin mash. So I don't know how to do the pounds to gallons, because I think that's a silly measurement. It's really awesome. A liter weighs a kilo. So damn the metric system, makes everything really simple. But basically that kind of works out to be, if you were doing a traditional English mash, or what most American brewers are doing, is probably around 2.5 to 1 liters to kilos, which is a very dry mash. So this is going to seem super wet. But when you look at all things equal, having this, thinner mash, it will yield a higher degree of attenuation, because you have a lot more of the enzymes tied up in the liquid. And you have to sparge less because you have more water to begin with. So I believe that your chance of, over sparging is less by doing this. Also, if you're doing things like a decoction, stuff like that, you need all those enzymes. You need all that liquid to preserve those enzymes when you're doing a boiling of the mash. pH, super important. Mash pH 5.2 to 5.5. You can use acidified malts to get it there. I use about 4%. Look at your water, take some pH readings, figure it out for yourself. It does taste sour if you've ever tasted acidified malt, but it takes a whole lot of it to make the beer actually sour. So don't be too nervous about it, is what I'm saying. You can also use food grade lactic acid. I use sour wort, so I actually use a wort product that's been soured that we get. One day, hopefully, I'll be able to make my own, but we don't brew quite enough to be able to do that. It does take a certain cadence of brewing in order to make your own sour wort. So I buy sour wort. So I don't use acidified malt at all anymore. We just use 100% pils with some of this sour wort to adjust the pH. And then beginning a boil pH and adjusting for boil pH is an interesting exercise. I believe in adjusting it at the beginning of boil. Some people believe in adjusting it at the end of boil. Some of that is due to hop utilization. If you adjust it at the beginning, you don't get as much hop utilization. So it can increase the amount of hops that you need to use. But again, I don't believe that we're using that much hops necessarily to justify doing it at the end. I think starting in the right place is the way to end in the right place instead of making up for it later. So again, using food grade lactic acid, and that's kind of a basic measurement there, using 130 mils and 10 hectos for a 0.2 drop. So you can do the math on your own system. But again, having a good pH meter is the best way to go. Last runnings. I think this is something that a lot of brewers actually don't pay attention to that much. And that's unfortunate because I think this is where you can do a lot of damage. As you start running off and as your Play-Doh starts dropping, your pH starts raising. And at some point, you're doing more harm than good. So even though you're getting a little bit of sugar, 2 to 3 Play-Doh sugar, what you start doing is extracting tannins and stuff like that from the malt. So really concentrating on those last runnings, you're better off, honestly, just cutting them off and adding water and adjusting your pH than taking that 5.7, 5.8 pH wort. Then you're looking at your end of boil, which your end of boil is going to aid in how your fermentation. And then your end of fermentation, pH is important for things, when you're talking about bacteria, thwarting bacteria growth, etc. And just when people talk about thin beer, I absolutely hate that terminology. Because I don't think it speaks to anything particular about the beer. A lot of people think that beers that finish like too low or thin, but that's been provably wrong for a very long time because alcohol is sweetness. I find that usually when I see a thin beer or flabby beer or whatever people think that, it's a pH problem is more than it is a alcohol problem or a malt problem. So mashing, like this is where we get to like the really cool fun stuff. You can make perfectly excellent lager beer on a single temperature infusion. I believe that. I've had it. My business partner, Bill he's won medals with it, with only having one temperature to work with. And so it can be done. I prefer to do all the stuff because I love making beer so much. And it's important to me to do all the tricks and stuff. But you can make great lager beer with a single temperature infusion. However, you need to think about a couple things. Your fermentability is the biggest thing. So you want to go low and long. You want that dry drinkability. You can add small amounts of Karen crystal malt in dark lagers to maybe mimic some of that melanoidin, some of that boiled character, some of that decoction character. But use a deft hand because too much of it, to me, I can always taste how much crystal malt is in there. It kind of tastes like being punched in the nose. It's kind of got this really metallic, irony character to it. So I would start on the low end and then increase from there with some of your like Cara malts. But you can make excellent beer with single temperature infusion because honestly, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the fermentation. So upward step mash. So if you look at a lot of books, which I love the old books, they are not necessarily applicable anymore because of the way maltsters have, done our job for us, basically. So long acid rest, but honestly, it takes so long to do it. You're better off just adjusting pH with, acidulated malt or lactic acid. And then a traditional George Fix had 50, 60, 70. Again, not bad steps, but when you start to go too low, like under 55, you kind of start ruining some of the proteins for head retention. So because of the way modern malts are modified. So my typical mashing schedule is 55, 62, 71. I usually spend about 10 minutes at 55, 30 to 40 minutes at 62, and 30 to 40 minutes at 71. And then maybe a mash off decoction or a decoction in the middle there somewhere. So that's a very typical schedule for me. And again, it's reading books and deciding what I was trying to get out of each temperature step, because you're always making compromises no matter what you're doing. So trying to make the best compromises for the kind of beer you're trying to make. And now my favorite thing, which is decoction. And obviously this is also shows you just the mashing steps. If you're doing just an upward step, these little like dashed lines, that's actually when you're removing a portion of the malt to boil. So actually, it's weird. I find that some people don't actually understand decoction necessarily. And decoction is actually taking mash, so your liquid and your grain that you have in your lauter tun or in your mash kettle, and actually boiling that. Some people think it's the wort, so just taking it off the malt and boiling that. That's not a decoction. A decoction is actually boiling the mash and the liquid together. So this is a way to achieve these temperature steps without having a way to raise the entire temperature of the kettle. So they actually pulled a third out. So in my brewery, I have a mash kettle. So I mash into my kettle and I do a couple temperature steps through it with a steam heated. And then I actually remove 2/3 of it and I boil a third in there and then add that 1/3 that's been boiled back to my full mash. So when you're doing a double decoction, I do that 2 times to hit these temperature steps. So what I think that does, some people say it's not necessary. It's hocus pocus voodoo, whatever it is. This is kind of a short list for me of reasons why I continue to do it. It does help eliminate DMS. Melanoidins is everything you love about toast, right? It's all those dark flavors. There is something that happens if you're in a brewery while it's decocting, when it actually reaches boil, the aroma changes. And I have to believe that even though it's not necessary because of the way malts are modified, that it does change the flavor of the beer. And I like that flavor. Some people don't like that flavor. Some people do. Again, you should make the beer that you want to make. I prefer the flavor of our beer with it. In dark beers, again, I think it allows you to have a simpler recipe. No crystal malt, no caramel. Able to add color, especially on a direct fire without adding dark malts. Helps with attenuation in body. There is, again, some things like Strecker aldehydes, etc., thermal stress that reduces shelf life. But honestly, as a small brewery, I want all our beer drank very quickly, and I don't have any plans on shipping it across the country in hot and cold. And also, I love being a brewer. I think it's fun. It's part of the brew day. I'm not looking to get out of there any quicker. I love doing it. It's relaxing to me. Big thing about lager is the sulfur. A lot of people don't like it. I've seen a lot of beers kicked at GABF and things like that for sulfur. I think a lot of times that's incorrect. I do think it depends on the type of sulfur, though. So if you kind of look at this chart, you have kind of ale, no sulfur. It's kind of off-putting American lager. Again, a little bit more, but not much. And German lager, it does not taste like German lager to me without some sulfur. It has to be the right kind of sulfur. So we want that kind of like, we want SO2, which is like that flinty struck match. So as soon as you get it, it's that really clean sulfur. You don't want the, eggy sulfur, because that indicates some problems. But it is naturally occurring fermentation, especially as you go colder in fermentation. It is a preservative, and it is part of the flavor of German lager to me. Every single one of them has that small bit of sulfur in it. It shouldn't be overwhelming, but it should be there. Again, though, if you're tasting a different kind of sulfur or smelling a different kind of sulfur, there is some issues probably with your fermentation, underpitching yeast, etc. Perhaps even some bacterial infection. So yeast, honestly, the most important part of this whole thing, you could ignore the rest of the entire talk. Yeast and fermentation is the only thing that matters. Underpitching, which is a very big problem when it comes to lager. You should be pitching 1.5 million cells per mil per degree Plato. So basically 1.5 times what you would be pitching for a typical ale. And even more than that for some of them. And that is just for a regular strength beer. So 12 Plato beer or so. When you get to 16 Plato, you need to be pitching 2 million cells per mil per degree Plato. So these things are really important and can change everything that you've worked really hard to do, all the time you're going to take to make this beer. You should, if you have to err on the side of anything, it's err on the side of overpitching. Some of the problems with that over here, the biggest problem, honestly, is repitching, is that you've overpitched, and so the yeast doesn't make a lot of daughter cells. So you have a lot of very old yeast. So if you try to pitch it again into another beer, you could run the risk of having a stalled fermentation. So when in doubt, go over, but consult your local yeast person, and they should be able to tell you the right amount to pitch. And I know, especially when you're buying it from one of these companies, how much of an expense it is. But if your fermentation goes well and the beer is excellent and you kind of get on a schedule, I think you'll find that the ROI is that people will drink more of it. The beer will ferment at the pace it's supposed to. It won't be lagging as much, and you'll want to drink the beer more, which is even better. So maybe you'll make more of it. So ideal fermentation. So down at the bottom is the number of days. On the long axis is the Plato. And you're kind of watching these two things interact. You've got your temperature and your Plato interacting together. So as you can tell, we're all the way out at like 25 days really before it reaches terminal gravity. And you can see how long it's supposed to take. Some of the times I see when people make lager, they're perturbed that it's not like ale. You have to kind of forget what you know about making ale to make lager. It should be, the onset of fermentation should be very slow. It should decline very gently. You shouldn't have any sharp changes in temperature. Here you can see, basically I knock out, this is basically what we do. I'm a little bit colder than this, but knocking out around 7 degrees C and letting it free rise to 9, which I know seems silly, free rise to 9, and keeping it there. And you'll see no diacetyl rest. I'm a big proponent of no diacetyl rest. I think it defeats the purpose of making lager. Again, some of these are time issues, but if you're trying to make a really excellent lager, I think get rid of the diacetyl rest. It will change it significantly. And then this gentle kind of like decrease in temperature as the gravity keeps going. We're basically at terminal around 10, 12 days, but as you can see, it's kind of trekking along down there even as the temperature goes down. Primary. So again, we talked about this beginning part. People get worried if a couple hours after they pitch, they don't see activity, but that is literally, don't worry about it. You should not see the activity. That's when all your esters are made. You should see it just gently bubbling, and that lag phase is a good thing. You'll see less ester formation. Esters never come out, so the more gently you can start, that's part of that reason, knocking out a little bit colder and letting it rise a little bit so that it's not just gung-ho from the beginning. And then again, primary fermentation. I use the Clerk's rule of thumb again. Textbook of brewing is basically 8 to 12 days. So your primary fermentation, if you do a forced fermentation test, should take 8 to 12 days. If it's going slower than that, raise the temperature a little bit and just a degree or two. And if it's going faster than that, lower the temperature. You really want to kind of have a nice steady flow. That's a picture of my cellar right there. Those are the 200 hecto or 100 barrel fermenters, and then the little guy on the right there. There's a closer picture of it. Secondary fermentation. It's a picture of my lager cellar. You don't necessarily need to have lager tanks or anything like that. Again, slow and steady, no diacetyl rest. I believe it does defeat the purpose of lagering because it does train your yeast to kind of expect that like warmth. And there's no need to if you pitch cold. So you actually reduce the precursors for diacetyl, so alpha-ketolactate, etc. When you ferment colder to begin with, there becomes less of a reason for a diacetyl rest. So the colder you're fermenting, the less precursors for diacetyl to begin with. Also, when you train your yeast and when you warm it up and kind of allow it to eat that sugar right away, the cool thing about lager yeast is if you treat it correctly, it will continue to work all the way down to 0 degrees Celsius, which is amazing. Like you can see in that chart from before, that low rise. Every time I think I hit final gravity, by the time I am ready to go filter and take it again, it's always dropped a couple 0.2. And that to me is where the magic is. That's where that drinkability is just a little bit more. And I don't think you notice it unless you drink 2 or 3, but it's just part of the whole process. It's not one thing 100%, different or better. It's 100 things 1% that really, aid in the flavor of the beer. No crashing, unless you're going to do diacetyl rest, you might as well crash. I turn it down, very steadily, a degree C per day. We're not really down to 0 till about 4.5 weeks or so, 5 weeks. So it seems like a long time, but then it spends a good at least 3 to 4 weeks at 0. So lagering just means to store. Again, I don't think you need a lager tank. I like having them. I make only lager, so to me it was imperative to have that. But honestly, if you even just have another tank that you can put it in, change of sceneries, great, because it'll allow the yeast to kind of get out of the way. If you are doing spunding or natural carbonation with secondary fermentation, improves the flavor. That's why you're lagering, taking all this time very cold. Allows all that stuff to drop out. It precipitates the chill haze so that if you're going to filter, you have a brighter beer. And then honestly, as long as there's a little bit of yeast in there, you're maintaining the beer. I don't really put a clock on the beer until it's filtered, because that's when it really has the ability to oxidize so much more. A traditional lagering or traditional like schedule would be 1 week for every degree Plato plus 1. So if you're making a 12 Plato Helles, it should take 13 weeks from brut date to serve date. And I hope one day in my career I can get all my beers to be like that. Right now I'm about 10 weeks. But it's not as necessary anymore because we do, have modern things now. But giving it all that time, I think you'll really find a difference if you follow all these things. You'll find a difference in the 6-week mark to the 8-week mark. That's markedly different and more delicious. Clarifying, I'm a huge proponent of clarifying. I believe that the drinkability increases with how bright it is. I think it allows you to drink more of them, which is what I always want people to do. You can find the beer, although not very effective. With lager yeast, it takes time. And, honestly, the fifth ingredient that people don't talk about, we have yeast, hops, malt, and water, is time. Time is a huge part of making lager beer. And I think taking the time, you can get beer that's almost bright. There's no magic. It's just removing some of those things. I think yeast, our yeast especially, we use 3470, has a flavor character. I think it's slightly citric. And so when I think we remove that out of the way, it really becomes the beer it's supposed to be. And a lot of people will say that it removes hop flavor, etc. Well, you should be aiming for the beer past filtration. So really plan for that at the beginning. And then this is one of my biggest soapboxes, if anybody's ever been to my place, is presentation. You worked all this time, you made, you thought about ingredients, you thought about hops, you thought about everything you possibly could, and then you serve it in a dirty shaker pint with no foam, right? And how you dispense it too, it's part of the whole package, and I think it really brings it all together. So we are huge proponents of presentation, individual glassware, and some people think it's hocus pocus, but I think you drink with your eyes. I think it changes the flavor of the beer. I think it gives you an expectation about what it's going to be from the onset. We actually require bars that serve our beer to serve it in our glass, because I really got tired. I got sad, all this work that I put into this thing that I spent, my life's work in a glass, and it gets served just terribly in a bar. And I couldn't see that happening anymore. And so, to us, the glass is important. It's important to, our branding and marketing. I don't even like that stuff. It just happens to be the way I like to drink it. But the glass and the presentation matters, especially if you're in your own pub. You should give your customers the best experience possible. They shouldn't be able to have a better experience for your beer anywhere else. And I think it's a respect of the customer to treat the beer with respect and to give it to them the way that you want to drink it. We do something called slow pour pills, if anybody is familiar with it. We serve every beer like this can with foam over the rim. It takes 3 to 5 minutes to pour. And I've been accused of being gimmicky. But to me, that's the way that I like to drink my beer. So why wouldn't I give that experience to everyone that I'm serving? And that to me is super important. And I love glassware, man. Who doesn't? I think all of us have cabinets full of glassware for the right occasion. Mostly I drink my coffee out of it, I guess. So, and then these are some of the papers and articles that I use. And then there's my contact info. I'm free to email, etc. Sometimes I'm pretty bad at email, so you may not get it for a month, but I will respond eventually. So that's what I got for my yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I've learned so much today. I'm sure everyone else has too. You have a decent amount of questions down here if you have some time to answer them.
I have absolutely time. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So I'll start reading through these for you. Let's see here. Many breweries switch up a lot of ingredients and do more unconventional or trendy things to please customers. What do you all do in terms of marketing or beers to cater to culture changes and stick to your standards?
I don't, as it turns out. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm not interested in that kind of thing. I think if you love what you're making, you should make whatever it is. I'm not going to talk, shit about what other people are making, because if you want to make it and you have to put your brewery on the line, like that's your own, personal business decision. So, but for me, I don't really have a creative itch necessarily. I like making the same beers over and over again, but I do get to do some stuff with friends. If we make a collab at my place, it's always a lager and it has to be filtered. Those are the two requirements, and no ingredients aren't beer ingredients. But, we have used different hops. Made a 3.5% hoppy lager with Grüngeist and Matueka with a friend of mine who owns Amalgam Brewing, which is pretty much known for their saisons, etc. Making smoked beer. I've made a Czech dark lager, and I love lager. So if it falls into the lager category, I'm kind of down. We're about to release a corn lager that we made with 40% heirloom Oaxacan corn, which is really cool, that we ground ourselves, and it's like kind of pink, actually. It's pretty cool. And like, so these things like all fall into lager for me, even though I'm pretty much a traditionalist. We use all these techniques that I use on these other kinds of beer. We made something we call BFL, big fucking lager, because that's what it was. And we basically did a double mash. That's what I guess the cool kids are doing, where they mash in a beer. So we made basically our Meritzen recipe, mashed it in, used that wort to mash in another beer on top of it, and made a 35 Plato wort and made a 12% beer.
Whoa.
And fermented it with our house lager strain at 9 degrees C, so super cold, and made a beer that way. And to me, that's the way, opening up a brewery, which is time and money intensive, I decided at some point I was never going to have anything in a tank I didn't care about. And that is a personal choice of mine. I don't want to chase trends. I live in a brewery. Our brewery's in a city there's 12 within a mile of us. So I think it really behooves us to stick to what we do and not try to chase what everybody else is doing. And your customers are always going to tell somebody else or tell you what your competition's doing. And I don't think there's anything good in that. We can't make that much beer too. So If you like it, you like it. If you don't, go drink something else. That's cool with me.
I love that. Your guys' place is every brewer's favorite place to go when we go to Denver.
That's fantastic. I love that.
Right?
I love that, for the record.
We'll be seeing you in September. I'll make my trek out.
I'll be there. I'm sad that CBC is in Denver because I won't even really be able to go to CBC. I'll be so busy.
Oh no. I was kind of looking forward to it being in San Diego. I'll be honest. It's okay though.
I was too. I was looking forward to go making some collabs, sunning on the beach,
Yes.
Not playing host for a minute.
Yeah, that's not going to work this year. All right, let's go to another question. Are all your boils 70 minutes?
We do 90. We are at 50. We're about a mile high. So if you've ever made a soft-boiled egg, for example, it's a pretty good example. If you're at San Diego, a soft-boiled egg takes about 4 minutes to make. If you make a soft-boiled egg at 4 minutes, you have like a runny, disgusting, the whites aren't done mess. So it takes about 6 minutes here. So because of the higher level, we don't boil as hot. So all those reactions take longer. So we do a full 90-minute boil.
That makes sense. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So my friends are in like Idaho Springs and stuff like that, and like 7,000 feet. You'd be amazed at how it doesn't boil.
Yeah.
Like we boil at like 204 instead of 212.
204, huh? Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. I am an extract brewer. How does that affect the use of caramel crystal malt?
Just get your plain, like Pils malt extract. And honestly, when I've talked a lot to homebrewers, because I've done a lot of homebrew talks, because they want to make good beer as well and have good beer to drink at home. In extract brewing, I think use your plain Pils malt. You can steep some specialty grains if you want to, even including steeping some Pils malt in there to really kind of increase that flavor that has not been already, suctioned out of it. And then just, if you have to, a little bit of crystal malt, but start with none, right? You can always, the price of ingredients is fairly cheap. Like start with none and then increase it, 1% at a time, a very, very small amount, because you'll see a point where you love it and you think more is going to be better, and then you hate it. So.
Okay, so let's go on here. Do you check pH for all steps of all beers?
Yes, less these days because we make a lot of the same beers all the time. So I make Pils and Helles pretty much every other brew. So we don't do it as much anymore, but I will do spot checks here and there.
Okay.
To make sure everything's right.
All right. Any suggestions for filtering as a home brewer, specifically equipment for a homebrew scale?
Don't. As a home brewer, your risk of oxidation is going to be so much higher as a home brewer, and that's going to be the things that you're going to be the saddest about. Just give it time. If you move it, so what I recommend to home brewers, generally speaking, is to ferment in your carboy, your glass carboy, for 10, 12 days, and then move it off of the yeast after that long into like a corny keg, and allow it to build its own pressure there, and then take the temperature down if you can in one of it, like a Keyser or whatever. That is the way to do it. You'll be able to naturally carbonate your home brewer. It's going to be great. That stuff's going to drop out so much faster because it has, think about how much, it has 2 feet to fall, yeast does. So it will drop out very quickly, especially with a little bit of pressure underneath it. And then just be careful not to disturb the yeast at the bottom. And you can, pour it off as you see fit to try and get that yeast out of there. But it'll be excellent. I don't screw with it. Just give it time.
Okay.
Or drink a Keller. I just don't love Keller beer that much. So that's a personal thing.
What's your favorite beer then, or style of lager, I guess say?
Oh man, I love Pils and Helles. Helles for me has a special place. Pils is the first. Pils is like not a first love, but yeah, first love. Helles is really that beer. It is just, there's nowhere to hide in it. And so I know a brewmaster named Eric Toft. He's the head brewmaster at Schönraumer, which is near the Austrian border. A good friend of ours. And we were talking about, GABF, how can we improve some of these competitions that don't seem really fair for some of the styles we make? Because, you're drinking, just a tiny bit of it. You're not drinking a ton of it. And so how do you make an impact? And he was like, you know what we should do? We should just have all the judges in a room together, have a crate of each beer in there. They're not allowed to talk about the beer. And at the end of 2 hours, we count the empty bottles. And the one with the most empty bottles is the one that wins. And that, to me, like getting that Helles to be just the right amount of bland, that you really want to keep drinking it and that you stop noticing it and you can start doing, talking about the other things that you want to talk about. It should be a beer in the background. And I talk about beer a lot because it's my job and I love it so much. But at the end of the day, we want to make a beer for experiences. So people are just at our place drinking without thinking too much about, I did all that work for it. They don't have to worry about it.
Right. I love that. Okay. Let's go here and see if we have any other questions. I think we got them all. Do you brew New Zealand Pilsners?
I haven't. I don't know exactly what a New Zealand Pilsner is, but I'm assuming New Zealand hops. As a collab, at some point, we'll do something like that. I have made, like I said, a beer with Matueka. I've made a couple like hoppy lager styles with some different kinds of hops, but nothing explicitly like New Zealand Pilsner, I guess.
Okay. I think we got through most of or all of the questions. I was really excited to see you guys have been putting beer in cans. Are you going to keep that up after things open back up?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the toothpaste is out of the tube.
Yeah.
I don't love it. I love having canned beer, but I don't love putting beer in cans, if that makes we just put a down payment on a canning line.
Nice.
So we will have cans. We've been doing mobile canning. I think the quality of it's great. The hardest part is just the freshness. It was a really big thing for us to ensure that all of our draft beer was pretty much drank within 30 days, 45 days of filtering, and that's much harder in a can. So pretty much when I filtered beer before, it was 45 days, and every ounce of it would be gone. And I love that for freshness, right? It never has a chance to show age artifacts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that makes me really excited because, some cans made its way to California. It was really
I
nice.
know this. I know. I have a lot of friends in California. I was just in California actually till Wednesday, so
Oh,
I have a lot of
man.
friends in California. Yeah, I'm good friends with Bagby Beer.
Okay. Yeah.
Jeff and Dandy, who own Bagby Beer. Me and my husband Bill own our place. We just became fast friends, and we kind of try to think of a way that we can go hang out at any time. And now that we're all vaccinated, we made a Hefeweizen out there, so we made ale out there. It was good.
Perfect.
Should turn out awesome. Hopefully, we'll have it on draft here, and they'll have it there. So
awesome! I can't wait to get my hands
yeah.
on that. Perfect.
Yeah, we made Tamave with them, that Czech dark lager, which is great here. So
okay,
exactly.
Let's check in. I think these are all questions we answered already.
I see one about alt beer. So alt beer isn't an ale, or is an ale. It's not a lager. So we haven't made one at our place. I have done one as a collaboration. Again, I don't mind doing some of these things as collaborations other places, but at my place, lager only.
Nice. Do we have any other questions, guys, while you have Ashleigh here? Take this wealth of knowledge while you got it. What strain of yeast do you use?
So we use 3470, which is probably the most prolific lager strain. It's a Weihenstephaner. So the differences between the yeast, like I touched on at the very beginning, is that it's the absence of yeast character. So you should really choose a yeast in your brewery that works for you in your brewery, right? So if you can't quite knock out as cold or whatever, Augustiner, I should have brought up my homebrew talk because I have all the numbers on there. I want to say it's like 380 or something like that. But on deck strain, the Augustiner strain, kick a little bit less sulfur. So if you don't love the sulfur, again, you're making beer for yourself. So make whatever it is that you want to make. Kicks a little bit less sulfur. The Augustiner one does. Augustiner ferments a little bit warmer. There's also some ones, we used a Budvar strain, so Czech var, for our Czech beer. I don't love the Urkel strain because it does kick a lot of diacetyl. But again, find a yeast that works in your brewery for what it is that you want to do. Some of them are more flocculent, some of them are less flocculent, some of them clear up a little bit better. And again, I think it's about how you use it. I have the ability I do filter. I do everything super cold. We actually do knockout at 3 degrees C, so extremely cold, because we have a specialized tank called a flotation tank that actually is before the fermenter. So what happens is the cold break and dead yeast float to the top. So the colder that you can knock out, the more cold break that you get. So by the time we're actually into the fermenter, it's at 6 degrees C, and we ferment it 8.5. So there's a couple other steps. We have a couple other things that we do in our brewery, but as far as basic goes, find a yeast strain that you like working with. And try out a couple different ones. Try them out at different temperatures. You have this ability, especially if you're a home brewer, to kind of do these experiments. Split the batch into 2, and ferment it in 2.5 gallons at a time, and use 2 different yeast strains. You have some things that professional brewers don't have. Some professional brewers, have smaller fermenters, and they can split them as well. Like I recommend doing, finding the beer that you want to make. If you're not making your favorite beer, you're doing something wrong. Or at least not trying to make your favorite beer. You should be.
Absolutely. Why make a beer you don't want to drink?
Exactly.
Yeah. Look, sorry, Amber. I think I thought I asked it already. She wants to know if you ever make an ice bock.
So pre-pandemic, I was actually going to get an ice tank, a specialized tank to make ice beer. We have made ice bock before. It is a pain in the butt. If you do it in a commercial freezer, it takes a long time. It takes hours, like 12, 20 hours. Like it takes forever to actually freeze it, to transfer it. And it's delicious. I love it. I think it's really cool to make it. But it is difficult. So I was pre-pandemic, and hopefully now that pandemic is over-ish, I will have the ability to get an ice tank, and we'll make ice beer on a regular basis, because I think it's a really cool technique. And again, I don't have a lot of things to work with because I choose not to, but I think some of these things are expanding what people think of what is lager beer. And we are allowed to sell it now. It's not considered ice distillation. They've kind of made a ruling that basically it's considered phase change by, process. but you're only really gaining 2 or 3%. You're not, taking something that's 8% and making it 50%.
Awesome. All right.
So yeah, you can do it. Get after it.
That's great. Go for it, guys.
Yeah.
We have some new questions here. What advice would you give a new assistant brewer to ensure they are successful?
I think one of the biggest things about being a brewer is understanding truly what being a brewer is. It is being a janitor, of course, we all know that, but it's also a lot of hurry up and wait. It's a lot of monotony. A lot of people are really excited to make new recipes and things like that. And I think kind of the way that I got my start, so I started working in a homebrew store, and then started volunteering at a brewery, and then became an assistant there. And basically, when I got the opportunity to make a recipe of my own, of course, in my brain, I had all these ideas like, I'm going to toast oatmeal, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. But at the end of the day, my mentor was like, okay, show everybody you can make beer, and show everybody you don't have anything to hide behind. So make a beer that's under 5%, or, at 5%, with no more than 2 hops and no more than 3 malts, and make that beer and show people that you don't have anything to hide behind. And that's how you can start making beer. So get used to that monotony. And then I think it's important to start thinking like a brewer. And what I mean by that is anticipating the things that need to be done. A lot of things go wrong, and there's a lot of things that are going on around you. But thinking like a brewer just means like, okay, what do I need to do to be successful today? How can I set up the other people around me to be successful? Because when the whole thing runs smoothly, then there's more opportunity to do the fun things, right? I set up a brewery that has sloped floors and everything so that I could spend less time scrubbing and more time focusing on the things that were important to me. So honestly, keeping the focus and understanding that, yeah, I get to do lots of fun things. Like I've spent many days with many people that I admire, drinking tons of beer and talking shit, and I love those days. But those are just some days. Most of the days are what I did yesterday, which is a Saturday. I made beer all day. It took about 20 hours to make beer. That's the way we make beers, a lot at a time. And had to watch all my friends drink beer out on the patio while I hung out inside. So it's really getting to love the monotony and getting to love the little intricacies of what you do. And if you don't have that, it's not maybe a good career choice, I suppose. And for me, I own the brewery, and I don't have any designs on hiring somebody to make the beer for me. I need a life assistant. I do not need a brewery assistant. I need somebody to do my laundry and remind me to pay my bills and stuff. I don't need somebody in the brewery. I won't want to give up that anytime soon. So
I feel that in my soul. I need an assistant housekeeper. I just need another wife. I need a wife. I don't need a husband. Yeah. I need a wife.
Yes, exactly.
Let's see here. What's the easiest way to temp control as a home brewer? Is temperature control more lenient than we think? That's the main reason I stick to ales.
No, it's not more lenient than you think. I have made I did with a friend of mine make a steam beer using our house lager strain at warm temperatures, and it was rather delicious. It wasn't lager, in the true way I think about lager, but it was delicious. So, if you're not looking to make explicitly lager and you want to make some experiments, it's not necessarily important. But if you're trying to make true lager, it's really important. I've seen just, a cooler with a Johnson controller on it works really well. That's probably the best way. Building your own little cooling unit too helps. It is a little bit more advanced as a home brewer to do it just because of the equipment needs. However, as a home brewer, if you have some of these advanced things, you can actually do things that a lot of professional brewers don't have the ability to do, such as decoction. Decoction as a home brewer is a super easy process, right? You just take another pan, put it on the stove with your malt in it, spoon it out, boil it, put it back in. Professional brewer that doesn't have a system capable of that doesn't even have that tool. So as a home brewer, you in some ways have more advanced things than professional brewers just because of your scale.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't think of it. Let's see. You mentioned that in the later stages of fermenting a lager, you want to create a CO2-rich environment. Does this mean removing the airlock and sealing the fermenter with the CO2 it produces? I'm homebrewing using carboys.
You can't really do it in a carboy, unfortunately. It doesn't hold the pressure, especially when you go to transfer it. You really need a corny keg for that. So honestly, just invest in a corny keg. A lot of people are selling them. It's a great way to be able to keep beer under pressure. If not, it's not that big of a deal. Again, it's just one of those things that just takes your beer from here to a little bit higher, as having that ability to natural carbonate. But in a carboy, it's super difficult because there's not really a way to keep it sealed and still be able to get beer out of it.
Perfect. Well, we're right on our hour mark, and I think we got almost all the questions. We'll probably go over a couple minutes. The last question is, does the no crashing rule also apply to sweet oat? I can't talk. It's been a long 2 days.
It's Sunday, man. You guys have been rolling. I wanted to participate yesterday, but I was making beer, so.
Sweet oat lagers. So I don't think, you only make lagers, so I don't know if you'd really have an answer for
will you
that.
repeat that again? Sorry.
It says, does the no crashing rule also apply to lagers?
Yeah, so again, it's all about what you have the ability to do. I don't crash because, again, the yeast, if it's still in suspension, will continue to eat some of those sugars on its way down. But if you do a diacetyl rest, go ahead and crash. I think you get more benefit by going slowly. You're not in a hurry. If you're making lager, you probably shouldn't be in a hurry anyways, so there's no point in it anyways. And, if you have one of those Johnson controllers, or I see over here Inkbird in a freezer for temperature control. I'm not familiar with that, but I'm assuming, you can take it down. Even if you take it down 5 degrees, it's going to take a minute for all that to get down 5 degrees. So if you turn it down 5 degrees at a time, you'll see a slow decrease in temperature.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we're all set. Thank you so much for doing this talk today.
Yeah, no problem.
I learned a ton.
Thanks for having me.
Can't wait to get out to see you in a few months. Be here before we know it.
Absolutely.
Just a reminder for everyone, the slides from her presentation are up on the website. I'll drop it here in the comments again. There's lots of other seminars going today, so definitely check out the other sessions. And we'll see you all soon. Ashleigh, cool. Thank you again.
Thank you guys. Yeah, appreciate you. Cheers.
All right. Cheers, guys. Ladies.